Just two more bites, Justin murmured, excitement reaching into the borders of his words. You can do it, baby. You're doing so good. Just open up your mouth again. Good girl. Trixie groaned as she slowly chewed, head thrown back and eyes wrenched tightly shut as both hands rubbed her taut, overfilled gut. She forced a swallow, then groaned louder, her bulging stomach rising and falling dramatically as she breathed heavily. Her moans had reached a fever pitch, and she whimpered and whined, too full to even speak. One more, said Justin in a near whisper, eyes locked onto the groaning, bloated woman. She opened her mouth to protest but burped loudly instead. Giving her gut a couple of weak pats, she burped again, only to have Justin gently grab a side roll and give it a few wobbling bounces, forcing a cacophony of burps and moans out of her food-smeared lips. Look at you, baby. God. Just one more bite, he repeated breathlessly. No, Trixie whined, still making circles on her overfed gut. No, I can't. I can't. I'm too full. It's okay, baby, promised Justin, reassuringly picking up the fork with the remaining bite of cake. Crumbs were the only remnant of the grocery store sheet cake, and one glance at the scene would make it obvious where it had gone. No, protested Trixie weakly as he brought the fork up to her mouth. He grabbed her by the side roll again, shaking and jiggling her aggressively as she groaned once more, feeling herself wobble. Justin gave her belly a hard slap, and she let out a raucous burp, nearly embarrassed by how loud it was. Good girl, he praised gently, lapping the spot he just slapped. Now you have more room. He brought the fork to her lips again, and she opened her mouth obligingly, moaning slightly as she chewed the last of the sugary sweet confection. Good girl, said Justin, making no effort to conceal how his words dripped with lust. That's my big girl. You're getting so huge, aren't you? Trixie groaned in response, her chubby hands planted firmly on her gut as she whined. Aren't you? Justin repeated, smacking her gut again at its tight, rounded top. She burped again, then resumed her groaning, too full to even sit up. God, look at you. You look like a beached whale. Your blubber is spilling out everywhere. He gave her fatty belly a pinch, and she burped again, unexpectedly this time. You sound like such a pig, he teased, both hands finding their way to her overstretched gut. You look like one, too. God, you're so fat. He got closer, applying more pressure as he wobbled her gut harder and harder. She moaned in protest, burping louder and louder as Justin shook her gut more and more roughly. Look at all this, he marveled. Look at how much I can grab. You've really let yourself go, haven't you? You've lost control. Trixie's moaned in response, but Justin shook his head, pushing her further backwards into the couch as he squeezed her plush fat. I said, he began, kneading her fat as she cried out from the pressure. You've lost control, haven't you? He gave her gut another firm slap. Haven't you? Justin laughed as Trixie nodded through her bark. Come on, use your words, Piggy, he instructed. Have you lost control? Yes, breathed Trixie desperately, both hands again rubbing her globular gut. Yeah, Justin affirmed in a low voice husky with desire. Little out-of-control piggy, stuffed so fat that you can't even move. Furiously, Trixie, look at all this. Began to wobble her gut slowly, and her entire fattened body shook from the movement, her plump tits bouncing up and down as they nearly escaped the tiny crop top she wore. Her thick arms and plush chubby thighs also jiggled along, the newly spilled fat all over her body shaking as one. You fucking whale, Justin murmured, barely audible as he gazed down at her hungrily. You big fat pig, you bloated fucking pig. Trixie's eyes were closed now, and she'd resumed her groaning, too full to do much else. Stay right there, just like that. He reached for his belt buckle with one hand, the other still glued to Trixie's swollen gut. Just like that. I'm gonna take care of you, baby. The next day, Trixie awoke to the smell of bacon. She sighed. She wasn't sure exactly how long Justin had been up, but smelling bacon was never a good sign when it came to him, especially after a night like last night. She stretched, rubbed the sleep out of her eyes, then yawned. No matter how much sleep she got after one of Justin's dinner parties, she was always still exhausted the next day, swollen and tender from how much food she tacked in, among other things. Justin was always energetic afterwards, in a great mood, but she would be lethargic for the next week. She surprised herself by letting out a burp, then she flushed. Her hand dropped to her stomach and she started, taken aback by how far her hand sunk into her own plushness. Her gut bulged out further than it ever had when she was stuffed, but instead of firm and taut, her rounded belly bounced and wobbled at just a touch. Oh God, she thought, sinking her fingers into her fat as she investigated her newly plumped body. How much damage did he do last night? She wondered absentmindedly as she played with her wobbling rolls. How many calories was in that cake? She swung her feet over the side of the bed and stood up with effort, cringing as she noted how long it took her fleshy body to stop jiggling at the movement. She was completely naked, the previous evening's clothes tossed somewhere around the living room, and each step she took emphasized her weight. The swell of her belly shook and bounced as she plodded to the bathroom, and her ass wobbled cumbersomely behind her, nearly uncontrollable. She looked at herself in the mirror, pausing a beat before her hands fell to her gut for a second time. Things were really getting out of hand. She stared back at the fattened version of herself in the mirror, gripping her fat in disbelief. Her face had swollen to a moon shape and her chubby cheeks had exploded with fat, squeezing her eyes into a smaller shape that peered out from a face framed by double chins. Her neck had nearly disappeared in a ring of fat and wobbled when she shook her head or chewed. She was unrecognizable, a fact that had been confirmed when she ran into an old friend from college who struggled to believe that the bloated tub in front of her was the once thin Trixie. Her body had fared no better, and she sported thick, swollen arms hanging with fat, pudgy, inflated tits that sagged and bulged out of her bras, and most prominently, a porky, tubby beer gut that refused to succumb to gravity. The more she put on, the more it bulged forward, and she was beginning to have a hard time buckling her seatbelt when Justin drove her to get more fast food. He'd grown rock hard the first time he saw her struggling with that, speeding home to shove burgers down her throat until she was ready to pop while he moaned about how sexy she was. She couldn't contain her gut in any of her clothes anymore, instead allowing it to hang out of the bottom in a way that drove Justin wild, enticing him to slap the exposed flesh and make it jiggle. She sighed again, lifting her gut with two hands before releasing it with a plop. She felt it bounce, her entire middle shaking rhythmically. She was getting huge. Everything Justin was saying was right. Just the other day she burst out of her shorts while he fed her, the only time he'd ever ended up feeding prematurely to fuck her right then and there. She'd still been required to finish her food afterwards, though, and Justin had been so gentle as he shoved in bite after bite, feeding her well into the morning. Her capacity was increasing, and even though she wanted to try and conceal it from him for her own sake, Justin knew. He'd been pushing her to her limits more and more lately, and it was beginning to show. She was exploding. Every time Justin fed her, she woke up feeling and looking much larger. It had to be her imagination. She couldn't put on that much weight in one night, but the bloat never disappeared, swelling more and more with each greasy session. She turned around, inspecting her widened, wobbling ass. This was the only reason she'd agreed to try this in the first place. She'd always wanted to be thick, and her wish had been more than granted. Her enormous, shelf ass wobbled dramatically whenever she walked, her thick thighs rubbing as she forced them past one another. Justin was obsessed, constantly smacking it sharply just to watch it ripple. Trixie took a step back. She could barely take herself in the mirror anymore. She was getting too wide. She pinched her belly, then sighed once more. Breakfast time. She waddled to her closet to grab a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, wondering what Justin had prepared today as she turned sideways to slide into the narrow closet door. It had always been a tight squeeze, even when she was a size 4, but now she could barely work her way inside. She sucked in, pushing in her belly with her hands for extra room, then forced her way through the door's narrow frame sideways. The first time Justin had seen that little maneuver, he'd taken her right there in the closet, not even bothering to grab a few boxes of Oreos to stuff her with first. She grabbed a pair of XXL shorts that had grown 1X too small and stepped into them, her bulging round gut acting as an obstacle as always. She got the pants over her thighs after some resistance, then sucked in with all her might and yanked the waistband over her lower belly. The fabric creaked but stayed, and Trixie gently let out her belly in relief, trying not to dwell on how large its natural shape expanded as it swelled forward. Pants on, she turned to the problem of a shirt. Her belly refused to hang, instead protruding further and further outward, which meant no shirt could be yanked down to cover its swell. She settled for t-shirts that wore more like crop tops nowadays, and let her plump, tubby gut round out unencumbered. She pulled down the shirt anyway, watching as it sprang back up immediately, then waddled out of the closet. Despite herself, she was hungry. When she reached the kitchen, Justin greeted her cheerily without turning, still focused on the mountain of pancakes he'd been constructing while she slept. "How'd you sleep?" he asked as she shuffled towards the kitchen chair. "Fine," she replied lightly, dropping into the armless chair heavily as it creaked to make its protest known. "You were so fucking sexy last night," Justin reminisced wistfully. "So fucking sexy," he began, turning to her. He paused as he caught sight of her, his breath hitching in his throat. "What's wrong?" Trixie asked with sincerity, alarmed by the expression on his face. "You look huge," marveled Justin in awe. "Justin," Trixie started, attempting to assuage him, but Justin couldn't be deterred. "God, you look like you put on 20 pounds just last night. I've never seen you look so fat." He dropped the spatula and took a few steps toward her, the pancake grounding on the stove forgotten. "Stand up," he instructed, and Trixie did as she was told, knowing it would be easier than letting him convince her. He poked her belly gently, pressing his finger deep into the swells of fat on her side rolls, then grabbed the lowest one firmly and gave her belly a series of hard wobbles. "What have you done to yourself?" he whispered, clearly growing more and more excited as he fondled her gut. "You're bursting out of these clothes," he gloated with a grin, smacking the overtaxed shorts that her belly and ass were stretching paper thin. "I always am," Trixie replied with an eye roll. "Not like this," murmured Justin in a near whisper. "You're getting so fat." He grabbed her belly with both hands and pulled her near, Trixie feeling against her upper stomach just how excited he was by the way her shirt was fitting. "You're getting so fucking fat," he repeated, shaking her more aggressively now. "You're so fat. God, just look at yourself." He smacked her gut, admiring the syncopation of its jiggles. "Look at all this. Look at yourself." By the time he started talking like this, it was already too late. He was going to feed her again. Another little dinner party, except this one was at 10 in the morning. Justin usually only started his lustful, excessive sessions at night, but he'd been overfeeding her during the day more and more often recently. "Sit down," he said with a point, and Trixie obliged soundlessly, knowing resistance was futile. Justin brought over a plate laden with bacon, 2 stacked high with pancakes, a plate of hash browns, a plate of sausage, and a gallon of orange juice. "Justin," she warned, her hands already resting on her stomach as if feeling its upcoming pangs of fullness. "Justin, I'm really not hungry." "Even better," he replied casually, pouring half a bottle of syrup on the first stack of fluffy, golden brown discs. "Eat up." He handed her a fork, and Trixie surveyed the scene miserably, feeling her empty gut press into the table despite how far back she'd scooted her chair. "You know you want it, fatty," came Justin's voice floating in her ear. "You need it, don't you?" he asked coyly, watching the expression on her face shift near imperceptibly as he pushed the plate closer to her. "Go ahead, big girl. I know you can barely stop yourself." The mouth-watering aroma became too much, and Trixie relented, first shoving 2 bites of bacon into her mouth greedily before also cramming in a massive bite of pancakes, the syrup dripping from her lips. "Fuck, Trixie," Justin breathed. She hunkered down and began to eat with abandon, shirking her fork in favor of fingers quickly becoming sticky with syrup. She crammed bacon into her mouth by the threes, folding her pancakes so she could get the whole circle in her mouth at once. She paused, burped loudly, then dove back in, temporarily forgoing her bacon to scarf down the entire plate of hash browns and sausages in just a few moments. "Keep going, baby," Justin cooed, beginning to trace gentle circles across her rapidly bloating gut. "Don't stop." Trixie couldn't stop if she'd wanted to, and despite her earlier complaints in the mirror, she ate like a woman possessed, greasy and sticky hands easing burps out of her overstuffed gut while her breathing got heavier and heavier. She completed the first stack of pancakes and was now working on the second, the remainder of the syrup bottle appended over them. Her face was becoming a mess, and her fatty chins were slick with syrup and bacon grease. She grabbed 2 more syrupy pancakes, folded them, and attempted to shove both in her mouth, her cheeks bulging, rippling as she tried to chew while forcing even more into her greedy face. Another few handfuls of bacon and the once towering platter was beginning to run low, the remainder of the greasy meat sticking with the syrup her hands were coated in. She doubled down, alternating between massive bites of pancake and savory swallows of bacon, her gut swelling impossibly round and forcing her chair even further back from the table. Justin was watching in awe, face contorting into a lust-drunk expression embroidered on the painful as those jeans grew tighter and tighter like Trixie's gut. His hands were back on her body now, and she felt her belly being jiggled, wobbled, and shaken as she packed in bite after bite, feeling the swell and breathing deeper as her fat gut stretched tighter and tighter. Just as she reached for the last pancake, slowing down a bit as the calories began to catch up to her, Justin muttered "shit" and jumped out of his seat, running towards the oven. She groaned, then barked at the effort of turning her head, barely able to see what the urgency was. Justin had taken the final scorched pancake off of the stove and was now opening the oven to a decadent, sickeningly sweet smell to which Trixie was well accustomed. His famous cinnamon rolls, famous not only for their incredible taste, but also for the unbelievable amount Trixie could put away. She whimpered at the smell of the rolls, then shoved the last pancake into her mouth anyway, syrup dripping down her chin. Justin set them to cool, then crossed the kitchen back to her, hands already extended to grip her impossibly fattened gut. "You're such a good girl," he encouraged, beginning to rub slow circles on her distended gut. "You were hungry, weren't you?" Trixie ignored him, continuing to moan, and he slapped her gut forcefully for the infraction. Trixie groaned, then let loose an enormous bark, face flushing. "I asked if you were hungry, Trixie," said Justin once more, a wild look dancing behind his eyes. "Yes," Trixie panted in between heavy breaths, attempting to lean back in the too small chair to relieve some pressure from her growing gut. "You're still hungry, aren't you?" Justin informed her, no hint of a question behind his intonation. "Justin, no, no," Trixie begged, squirming as she attempted to shift herself forward again. "No, I can't." Justin rubbed her gut lovingly, playfully kneading its rounded top. "Yes, you can. You want to." "No," she whined in a near yell. Justin smacked her gut for her outburst, forcing a series of deep burps out of her mouth. She groaned as he rubbed her expansive belly, muttering comforting words before smacking her gut again, leaving her wobbling and burping while he went to grab the icing-glazed rolls. "Now," he says on his return, setting the pan down on the table, "are you hungry?" Trixie was the picture of gluttony, absolutely beached in the chair by her massive, spherical gut that dwarfed the rest of her tubby body. She leaned her head forward with effort, rubbing her stretched gut fruitlessly. "Trixie," said Justin, taking a firmer grip on the bottom of her bulky belly, "I asked you a question. Are you hungry?" Trixie nodded listlessly, and Justin began to shove the still warm rolls into her mouth with abandon, smearing cinnamon sugar and icing all over her face. Her plump lips opened again and again for more, moaning non-stop now as her belly slipped out of her shorts and bulged free, her stretch mark-covered love handles oozing over the back waistband. Her t-shirt was like a bra, and she noted with horror that even the sleeves were starting to cut into her chubby arms. Her belly surged further and further forward, and Justin couldn't keep his left hand off her while his right hand forced the rolls into her face faster and faster. "You're so fat," he was saying, kneading the still pliable rolls as he filled her. "You're getting so fat." The pan was nearing its end now, and Justin fed her even faster, cramming her cheeks until they were about to pop. She swallowed the massive bites with effort, her mind completely empty as Justin forced her further and further over her limit. Trixie swallowed the last bite, then burped loudly, gripping her gut with both hands. "Look at you," Justin choked out after a moment, his voice betraying his desire. "You're such a pig. Look at what you've done to yourself." Trixie was so full she'd begun to hiccup, and the alternating hiccups and burps made her jiggle slightly as she lay back in her chair, trying to catch her breath. "I didn't," she responded laboriously. "You did this to me." Justin didn't say a word, instead standing silently and reaching both hands towards her. "Justin, I can't get up right now. I can't," she whined, drawing up a word. "Yes, you can," said Justin calmly. "I'm gonna take you to the bedroom, come back and get the whipped cream, and then you're gonna show me exactly how you got to be such a fat, greedy piggy." She groaned again, and Justin smacked her gut, eliciting her loudest, deepest burp of the day. There, he said, watching her continue to wobble. Now you have a little extra room. Chapter 2. Trixie shifted uncomfortably, trying futilely to alleviate some of the pressure from the seatbelt cutting mercilessly into her protruding belly. Justin turned to glance at her as she squirmed, taking her in for just a second too long before his eyes flitted back to the road. What? He asked, gesturing towards her lap. Eat your snack. The snack in question was enough fast food for two. One greasy bag emptied entirely of its extra-large triple patty combo and one still mostly accounted for, except for a few handfuls of fries. Trixie held one bag in her lap, or the little bit that remained after the protrusion of her gut, and the other bag, its contents devoured in just a few minutes, was crumpled at her feet. I'm not hungry, she muttered grouchily. As usual, Justin had insisted that she required meal-sized snacks on any outing they had. Whether it was a 5-minute ride to the grocery store or a 20-minute drive to a restaurant, he seemed to be convinced that her strength would wane if she rode in a car without packing herself full of greasy calories, and his logic was starting to have the intended after effects. Trixie's seatbelt was now painfully tight and cut into her fleshy, swollen gut so deeply that its fatty sphere was transforming into a flabby double belly, the lower half of the seatbelt made nearly invisible after being swallowed by her mass. The seatbelt was completely invisible to Trixie, of course, who could see little over the massive shelf of her cleavage. The comparatively tiny sports bra she contorted herself into was comically unequipped for the role, and her jiggling breasts spilled over the tops of her low-cut shirts obscenely, wobbling rhythmically along the rest of her whenever they hit a pothole. Her more than ample cleavage was bisected by the seatbelt's upper half, and the combination of the tight belt across her gut and chest pushed her bulging fat to protrude from her tiny, skin-tight tops at every possible angle. As they drove, the manufactured lower roll caused by her too tight seatbelt was entirely bare, the tank top she wore creeping upwards until her jiggly pale belly was free to undulate as it wished while resting upon her plump thighs. Lately, she'd been feeling more and more uncomfortable every time she squeezed herself into the passenger seat, and she knew Justin was beginning to take notice. She felt her thick, ever-inflating thighs encroaching the edges of the car's fabric seats despite how firmly they were pressed together, and lately when she's had a little too much to eat, she's had to suck in with all her might to yank the seatbelt over her swell and force it closed. Justin had been taking her on little errands more and more often, and just last week mentioned that she would be in the market for a seatbelt extender soon, much to her chagrin despite the lustful glint in his eye. She sighed, placing her hand on the side of her gut and wincing at how far her tubby fingers sunk into the fat. What? Justin repeated, genuine concern softening his tone. Are you okay, baby? What do you mean you're not hungry? What's wrong? Do you feel sick? Trixie rolled her eyes, grabbing her extra-large soda to take a sip despite the way it contradicted her next statement. I'm not always hungry, she insisted, frowning. And I'm not sick just because I'm not hungry. I'm just not hungry. Justin smiled, turning to catch her eye for a moment before Trixie whipped her head away defiantly. So you have an attitude, he surmised, a chuckle clearly poised just on the edge of his words. Is my baby grumpy? Why are you grumpy, baby? Tell me. I'm not grumpy, Trixie fired back. I'm just not hungry. Why not? Justin asked, still grinning. Trixie narrowed her eyes at the grin, furious at the knowledge that he was enjoying this. Because I'm not, she repeated, her voice hardening. But why are you not? Justin asked, the teasing tone that always reared its head as he fed her seeping into the edges of his voice. What happened to make you not hungry? I already ate, Trixie retorted quickly, then immediately frowned as Justin's smile grew. Damn it, she thought. Already ate what? Justin asked casually, feigning innocence. Trixie sighed again, more loudly this time. I already ate enough, she muttered. I'm full. Well, what exactly did you have? Justin asked, turning to look at her head-on as he brought the car to a stop at the light. What all did you eat to make you so full? Trixie squirmed under the pressure of his gaze, his good looks and intensity still enough to make her feel butterflies after the 3 years they'd been together. It was hard for her to tell him no in general, but impossible when he weaponized those eyes. I had a burger and some fries and some onion rings, she muttered, her face growing a light shade of red. And that's all you ate today? Justin asked, still staring her down. There was a silence as the flame of Trixie's blush expanded, and she found herself fumbling for words until the light changed and Justin fixed his attention back on the road. And the breakfast I had before I left, she finally eked out, nervously tugging at the fabric of her seatbelt buried in her gut as if it would magically expand to accommodate her. "What did you have for breakfast?" Justin asked casually. Trixie tugged at the constricting seatbelt with even more rapt attention, hoping to seem as if she somehow hadn't heard him. He knew exactly what she'd had for breakfast that day. He'd prepared every component of the feast and watched her while she scarfed it down to make sure she finished every single bite. "Trixie," Justin chided cloyingly, his brilliant smile widening even further. "Answer me. What did you have for breakfast?" Trixie squeezed her eyes shut, the familiar embarrassment about how much of a glutton she'd become rising in her chest despite her now daily gorges. It was one thing to cram all that food down her throat, to feel her gut getting bigger and bigger as she watched her flabby arms reach for bite after oversized bite. It was one thing to let Justin feed her and fondle and flab until she couldn't possibly take another bite, but to actually recount the unbelievable volume of calories, grease, carbs, and sugar she took down in one sitting was too much, even for her. "Trixie," Justin warned, his smile easing into a smirk and a playful warning entering his tone. "Fine," Trixie blurted. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the bag of fast food still balanced precariously on the remaining availability of her lap. "I had French toast and—" "How much?" Justin immediately interrupted. Trixie tried to sink down in her seat, but found that her bulging body was more or less wedged in place. "2 loaves," she admitted quietly. "Oh," murmured Justin thoughtfully, as if surprised to learn the information. "What else?" "French toast and some Oreos and the chocolate chip cookies you made and a roll of Pillsbury croissants and the leftover biscuits and 3 bacon breakfast sandwiches from Porky's and 2 fried quesadillas." Trixie rushed out in one breath, her hand unconsciously beginning to knead her fatty side rolls out of nervous habit as she spoke. "And the bag of chips you ate right before we left," he reminded her. "It was family-sized, right?" he asked, as if he'd ever purchased her any other kind. Trixie nodded, shamed into silence. "Right?" Justin repeated commandingly. "Yes," Trixie squeaked out. "Yes, what?" Justin teased. "Yes, the bag of chips I ate was family-sized," Trixie obliged quietly, her face an ever-deepening shade of red. "And you had a pack of sausages, right?" Justin clarified. Trixie frowned. She'd forgotten about the sausages. "And," Justin continued, "you had 3 leftover cinnamon rolls and a pint and a half of ice cream with your French toast. You also got a hash brown on the side with each of the Porky sandwiches and drank almost a full liter of Coke. Then you had the cream soda, right? 3 cans. Then you ate that bag of mini candy bars. And it wasn't some Oreos, was it, baby? It was 2 boxes?" "Yeah," Trixie confirmed in an ear whisper. "Wow." Justin wondered, glancing at her again. "That's a lot of food." "I can see why you're so full," he said, his voice dripping with contrived sympathy. Trixie shifted again, the smell of the deep-fried delicacies in the bag in front of her becoming harder to ignore. "And with the fast food you just ate, that's enough food for the whole day, isn't it?" Trixie nodded, still looking down. "Probably more than just one day," Justin observed politely, flicking on his turn signal. "And you ate all of that before noon. Makes a lot of sense that you're full." He reached over and patted Trixie's ballooning belly firmly, leaving her whole body jiggling and her skin alight where he touched it. "You feel pretty full to me," he said, reaching out to grip her lower roll and give it a good shake. Trixie burped, as he knew she would, and he patted her gut again as her hands flew up to cover her mouth in embarrassment. "You sound full, too," he taunted, his voice dropping a pitch in a way Trixie was all too familiar with. "Yeah," Trixie attempted, the word coming out as more of a warble. She cleared her throat. "Yeah." "So much food," Justin started. "So many greasy calories. And that's not even all you've eaten today, is it?" This time, it was Trixie's turn to throw him a sudden glance. "Yes, it is," she asserted, her voice more confident. "I haven't eaten anything else today." "Oh, you haven't?" Justin challenged, the playfulness re-eclipsing the obvious lust in his tone. "You haven't eaten anything else today?" "Justin, I really haven't," Trixie reminded him. "I woke up, you fed me breakfast, you bought me burgers, and that's it. We haven't done anything else today." "You do realize," said Justin coyly, "that the day officially begins at midnight. You didn't have any midnight snacks?" Trixie immediately looked away, her cheeks blushing anew as hedonistic memories of her most recent 1 a.m. binge came flooding back. She'd stuffed herself so full that she was completely unable to sit up, and after a few low-effort attempts that left her grunting and panting and left Justin painfully hard, he pulled out the funnel to finish off the night's debauchery. Trixie, Justin called gently, interrupting her gluttonous recollections. Any midnight snacks? Trixie shifted in her seat again. Can we just drop it? She whispered, scooting the oil-stained, alluringly scented bag a bit closer. But baby, you said you were full, Justin defended, his voice full of laughter. I just want to help you. I want to make sure I understand exactly how much food made you so full. Fine, relented Trixie loudly, throwing up her chubby hands as her rounded, double-chin face morphed into a pout. Fine. I ate 2 sausage pizzas, 2 orders of garlic bread, and a gallon of vanilla ice cream through the funnel. She paused. And I ate a bag of chips while I was waiting for the food to get there, and yes, it was family-sized. She placed both hands on her protruding gut and gave it a big shake, feeling the movement reverberate throughout all the fat on her fleshy, overly stuffed body. I ate all of that even though I haven't been able to fit in any of my clothes for a week, and now you're making me go to the mall to get bigger sizes and you're still feeding me on the way, and that's why I'm full. Are you happy now? Justin grinned, ignoring the volume of her outburst. So, you don't want the food that's in your lap then? He asked, innocently. Trixie looked down and bit her lip. No, she replied, her voice dropping back down to a whisper. No? Justin repeated. No, Trixie unconvincingly reaffirmed, the unsteadiness in her voice betraying her hesitation. You're telling me that tearing into that bag isn't the only thing you've been thinking about since you started giving me attitude. Justin, Trixie began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. It's okay, babe, I believe you, he soothed. I believe you. You don't want that food. You're not hungry. You're too full. So just don't eat it. Trixie shifted again. If you're really not hungry, Justin continued, then it's no problem. Just don't eat the food. There should be no temptation. They eased to a stop at another light and Justin turned to face her. If you're not hungry, you should have no problem not stuffing your face for the 3rd time today. He looked her up and down as she shied away from his scrutiny. You really should be full, he marveled, grabbing her belly more aggressively. A big, fat piggy like you doesn't need any more food, do you? That's the problem, right? It's why I'm driving you to the mall in a tank top that barely covers your gut and sweatpants that are about to burst at the seams. 'Cause you can't stop yourself. It's like you lose all control whenever there's a meal in front of you. I barely even have to do anything. He prodded her protruding gut. Right? He demanded. Right, mumbled Trixie quickly, feeling herself beginning to get worked up at his words and touch. Right, so just don't eat it. Okay, agreed Trixie in a small voice. Justin continued to drive in the silence, his signature coy smirk sneaking back onto his face as Trixie snapped glances at him. She looked at the bag in her lap, the temptation growing alongside her excitement. And if you do eat it, Justin began abruptly, then I'll know you're not full. I'll know you're still hungry and I'll have to stop and get you more food before we go try on clothes. After all, we can't have you going hungry. That wouldn't be right. Trixie nodded, still looking down. And if I get you more, you're going to eat all of it, he informed her. I'm going to make sure you eat every last bite, and I don't care how full you say you are. Because clearly, you don't know. Right? Trixie nodded again. Right? Justin led. Right, she murmured, her eyes fixed steadily on the bag. So don't eat it, he repeated. You know you don't need it. You know you've gotten so fat lately that you've started to waddle. You know you can't cram yourself into any of your clothes. You can barely even buckle yourself into your seatbelt. His voice dropped to a husky whisper. You know you're just a few pounds away from our kitchen chairs cracking underneath you. You're so fat you're about to destroy our furniture. You know you don't need one more bite. Trixie's breath quickened as he teased her, her body reacting to the familiar words and tone alongside the memories of the ravagings that always followed. If that ass gets any fatter, I'm gonna have to expand our closet door. The way you can barely wedge yourself in now is so goddamn sexy. The way your whole body wobbles as you try to suck in and squeeze past. The way it always takes you a few tries now. If you eat any more, you're gonna get stuck in there, aren't you? So you don't need another bite. To Trixie's surprise, Justin took a left and pulled into a parking lot, guiding the car into the nearest available spot and throwing it in park. Trixie looked at him, her confusion overtaking her arousal. Why did we stop? She asked, craning her neck behind her to see the logo on the building. Porky's. Because I know you, Justin answered calmly. I know exactly how far gone you are. I know exactly how much exploding yourself into a pudgy blob of fat turns you on. I know you have no self-control, and I know you love the way I fatten you up like you're a prize little piggy. I know you can't control yourself. I know you don't even want to. I know you're soaking wet at the thought of needing a seatbelt extender. I know how much you like what I've done to you. You know you're gonna cram that burger into your fat face whether you're hungry or not. And just like I promised, I'm gonna buy you more food as soon as you do. Trixie swallowed hard, her brain an indiscernible jumble of lustful thoughts. And when I buy you more food, Justin started, grabbing her face to turn her attention towards him and squeezing her tubby cheeks, you're gonna eat every last bite, just like I promised. The look in his eyes was too much for Trixie, and without breaking his gaze, she grabbed a fistful of fries and began to cram them into her mouth, moaning at both the taste and the feeling. That's a good piggy, murmured Justin lustfully, releasing his grip on her face so she could chew. His eyes locked on her as she gorged herself in the parking lot, alternating between mouthfuls of salty fries, oversized bites of burger, and slugs from her extra-large soda until the meal was devoured in a matter of minutes. She burped, patted her gut, then burped even more loudly, beginning to rub the swollen mass as Justin shifted the car back into drive. "I want more," she whined breathlessly as Justin began to caress her fattened thigh with one hand. "I know you do, baby, I know," he murmured. "I'm gonna get you all the food you can eat," he promised as they pulled up to the drive-thru. "I'm gonna make sure you're never hungry again." Chapter 3. Trixie sighed in relief as she unbuckled her seatbelt, finally able to breathe properly as the bloated, overfull swell of her gut surged forward freely. The previous day's shopping trip had ended before it even began, after Justin ordered enough for a whole family in the drive-thru they'd stopped at, watched Trixie devour it messily until he could barely keep his hands off of her, and decided that he needed to take her home immediately. He had ordered more food on the way, delivery from their favorite Chinese spot, and by the time Trixie had finished one meal, the next had arrived. She had stuffed herself with abandon, completely losing control as she crammed down more and more greasy food. Her tank top had rolled entirely into her fattened tits, leaving her growing, globular belly entirely exposed, and her XXL sweatpants had literally burst at the seams, her plush fat pushing and spilling out as she ignored the snapping threads and took another bite. She always overate, always took things too far, but yesterday it was like she was in a trance. After demolishing the food they'd ordered, Justin supplied Trixie with snack after fattening snack, pushing her to her caloric limit with everything they had in the pantry until she begged for mercy. Justin kept going as usual, pulling out the funnel and pouring 2 pints of chocolate ice cream down her throat while she groaned, both hands rubbing her impossibly bloated belly while she gulped down the fattening liquid. Justin had wanted to take her to the bedroom, her display of gluttony far too much for him to take, but Trixie had eaten herself too fat to move, eached flat on her back on the couch by a mountain of her gut protruding into the air. She had eaten until she was literally trapped within her own fat. Her enormous gut was so rounded by the mass of food inside that the rolls on her side had all but disappeared, replaced by a firm, fatty ball that was packed so tight it barely wobbled. The top of her gut had rounded significantly over the last month, and before the feast had forced her to her back, Trixie had been resting a hand comfortably on the top of her gut as if it were a table, periodically pressing into the swell and forcing out deep burps that just made her eat faster. Her entire body had clearly grown, and the feeding session just made things more obvious, made Trixie and Justin take stock of just how far they were going. Trixie was becoming a whale, blowing past fat and stuffing herself closer and closer to morbid obesity with every burger, every swallow of ice cream funneled down her throat. She was already to the point that basic activities like getting dressed or struggling out of bed left her panting, and the couch was beginning to worry her with its loud protests every time she plopped her growing body down, the creaking of the frame turning her on despite the fact that her overfed ass was just a few pounds away from demolishing it. Justin had noticed too, and would sometimes make her sit down, get up, and sit down again, not just to hear the weakening couch crack under her weight, but also to watch the way she heaved herself forward, how she had to brace herself and make several attempts to swing her weight forward, and how she grunted with effort as she struggled to her feet. The little exercise, the only exercise Trixie ever got outside of the bedroom, left her red-faced and wobbling, sometimes even sweating from the Herculean task of carrying around the bulge of excess weight that Justin had crammed onto her once trim form. Standing up from anywhere was getting more and more difficult, and as Trixie grew, she relied on Justin more and more heavily to do the things that she could no longer do. Bending down had long been dismissed as an option for her as her chunky belly inflated, growing too large for her to bend down comfortably without her fat getting in the way and throwing her off balance. She was never not stuffed, never went more than a couple of hours without food, and the toll her caloric onslaught was beginning to take was almost as enormous as her. After yesterday's little binge, she'd been stuck on the couch for hours, groaning as her stomach worked overtime to digest the week's worth of food she'd shoved into her pudgy lips. Once she awoke from sleeping off a bit of her binge, her hunger was renewed, and Justin took full advantage, replenishing their food stores with a grocery delivery before having Trixie's favorite pizza delivered for the second night in a row, alongside wings, breadsticks, cinnamon rolls, and 2 liters of soda. He'd forced her to drink an entire liter of soda before she began, wanting to hear her burp from the pressure and fullness as she ate, and the intoxicating smell of the pizza spurred her on, leading her to down the sugary soda in just a few minutes and begin her gorge. She burped loudly every few seconds as Justin had wanted while she devoured the slices in 2 bites, her hands working to ease more burps from her bloated middle as she moaned from overfullness, never slowing down until the entire meal had disappeared. Justin's awe and encouragement only made her hungrier, and he'd helped her waddle to the bedroom only to discover that she'd eaten herself into such a round, bloated ball that no possible position was comfortable, the first time Trixie had gotten too fat for sex. The situation drove Justin crazy, and the wait for her bloat to go down was well worth her while when he was finally able to take her. The pressure built up from the extended time he'd spent rubbing and exploring her fattening body all released in one go. Her gain was far past out of hand and was beginning to grow ridiculous. Just that morning, Trixie had been forced to ask Justin for help getting access to her ever-shrinking clothes, the aftermath of last night's feeding leaving her too bloated to suck in and worm her way into the overly narrow closet door. He had grabbed her a pair of too tight sweatpants and a t-shirt she could barely get her pudgy arms into that left the lower half of her belly completely exposed, smacking the fatty shelf of her ass and leaving her whole body jiggling after handing her the goods. He'd also grabbed her a sports bra that she wore often, one of the few her heavy, wobbling breasts could still be forced into, and she discovered that no matter how she repositioned herself in the overtaxed elastic garment, she couldn't get it to fit properly, her fat tits pushing over the top and spilling out of the bottom, bouncing unrestricted as they fought to be free from the confines of the insufficient bra. Realizing that nothing left in her closet would fit, Trixie tugged on the t-shirt with her breasts free, turning red as she looked in the mirror and noted just how obvious it was that she was going braless. Her tits, unlike her belly, had yet to succumb to gravity, and as they grew fatter and fatter they simply bulged out further, resting lightly on the swell of her belly but surprisingly perky despite their heft. Just examining herself in the mirror, seeing her thick, tree-trunk thighs straining at the seams of her sweatpants and the bulge of fat where her sleeves were cutting into her chubby arms was enough to get her worked up as she pictured what Justin would say. How he'd study her body like he was trying to memorize it, bend down to kiss the pale swell of her belly as it surged forward and tell her exactly what he wanted to do to her. Her nipples were visible beneath the t-shirt stretched thin by her mass, and Trixie tried to focus on something else, to calm herself down so she could go out in public without her oversized tits attracting more stares than they already would. Focusing on anything else when she was that size was impossible, however, and even turning to waddle away from the mirror made her body jiggle so wildly that she felt herself growing hot. She begged Justin to let her have a light breakfast, arguing that they'd never accomplished yesterday's goal if he couldn't stop himself from undressing her every time she ate, and he surprisingly obliged, preparing her a moderately sized stack of pancakes, half a pack of bacon, and orange juice. The indulgent meal was so inconsequential compared to what she was accustomed to that it barely amounted to a light snack, and as they pulled up to the town's run-down, dying mall, Trixie's stomach began to growl. She was starving. "What's wrong?" Justin asked, turning to her as he twisted the keys out of the ignition. "Nothing," Trixie grumped, a repeat of their argument yesterday. Her stomach growled again, and she sighed as a grin split Justin's face. "Hungry?" he asked lightly. Trixie sighed again, louder this time. "Can we just get this over with?" she asked, irritation coloring her tone. "I just need a few things." Justin nodded and exited the car, Trixie following suit as she attempted to pull her too small t-shirt down the expanse of her gut. The fabric wouldn't quite stretch to her belly's hanging, wobbling bottom, and as soon as she released the hem it sprung back up to the middle of her gut, leaving her gluttony on display for all to see. She frowned, attempting to pull the stretched waistband of her sweatpants over her belly, but the elastic was already taxed to the limit by her hips. There wasn't even a centimeter of give, and Trixie puffed lightly as she tugged in vain, her lower belly bouncing alongside her tits as she fought to wrench the waistband high enough to cover her shame. Justin had crossed to the other side of the car and was watching her in silence, that same familiar look on his face that Trixie could read like a book as he watched her struggle to contain all the weight he'd packed onto her. "I'm not sure that's gonna work," he finally offered in a voice clearly dripping with want. "Remember yesterday, when you split the sweatpants? You don't want that to happen here." Trixie rolled her eyes, embarrassed, and threw up her hands, the sudden motion leaving her fatty arms waggling. "Fine," she conceded. "Let's just go." Justin grabbed her hand and they walked towards the entrance. Trixie, consciously steadying her breathing so that it was less obvious that she was nearly puffing from a short walk through the parking lot. "I'm getting so fat," she thought, almost wanting to ask Justin for a break but unable to overcome just how humiliating that would be. They entered the double doors into the large, half-empty space, the shopping emporium briskly cold despite the bright sun and temperate weather outside. Justin and Trixie lived in a small town whose economy had been heavily impacted by the closure of several high-income businesses in the area, meaning that the lack of jobs and proper funding for education and improvement initiatives led many families to pack up and abandon the place they'd once called home. The town wasn't quite dying, but certainly wasn't thriving, and like many small towns across the U.S., now featured a semi-dilapidated mall chiefly frequented by seniors doing laps around its air-conditioned walkways for exercise and bored teenagers loitering about with no money to spend. The building was a construction of glass and metal that was modern at one point, and the stores within could say the same, each one's trendy storefront now appearing dusty and aged, and the once enticing advertisements on the wall yellowed. Trixie would have ordered her clothes online. It's what she'd always done in the past. But this last week had constituted an emergency, and when she and Justin had realized a few days ago that she'd literally outgrown everything she owned, he'd promised her a trip to the mall to grab a few things to wear in the meantime. Trixie was determined to find something in the first off-brand store they stopped in, hoping to put a quick end to this whole humiliating ordeal. The mall certainly wasn't crowded, but as she looked around she felt she saw people everywhere, standing or walking in small clusters and groups of two. Her hands fell to her belly, somehow wanting to cover or disguise the way her bulging fat hung from the bottom of her t-shirt and stretched out her once forgiving pants. She could swear that all eyes were on her, that each person in the building was staring at her massive, waddling form and wondering just how she got to be so fat. The thought, when as humiliating as it was arousing, made her nipples harden again and Trixie blushed, mortified at the way her body instinctively reacted to the kind of teasing that Justin inflicted on her when he fed her. When all of this had started, she'd only been into him, only cared that her weight gain drove him crazy. But the more time went on, the more fat Trixie added to her swelling body. The line between Justin's pleasure and hers was becoming blurrier. She'd never wanted to get fat, had only agreed to put on 20 pounds in fact, but now, fattened up to the point that she was unrecognizable, signs and reminders of her weight gain got her excited too. Just the knowledge that Justin would grip and fondle her new growing rolls enough to make her panties wet when her love handles jiggled free of her tiny tank tops. She grabbed his arm, feeling equal parts self-conscious and horny. "Where do you want to go first?" Justin asked, looking down at her. She shrugged. "Wherever." Justin looked around, squinting to read the signs on storefronts further away. "I swear I don't know anything in this mall anymore," he commented while his head swiveled, attempting to parse out their direction. "Remember when they first put in the arcade?" Trixie nodded, their shared memories of their small-town childhood flooding back to her. Trixie and Justin had both grown up in Toberfeld, but hadn't met until moving back to the town after college, meaning that they loved to reminisce over their pasts and discover what they had in common. They had been ships in the night, as it turned out, and as children and teens had played at the same parks, hung out in the same places, and even had some of the same friends. "I had the high score on Dance Dance Revolution," she bragged, the butterfly song, "and my best friend had the high score on Pluto." Justin lifted his eyebrows. "Impressive. Tiffany or Patty?" "Patty," Trixie confirmed. "We used to stay there for hours and pray. We'd spend our full allowance in quarters every week." Murmured Justin, pressing his fingers into the soft, plush chub of her forearm. "I'd love to see you try and do one of those dances now." Trixie frowned. "You know I'm too big," she whispered back, embarrassed at the less than likely thought that someone may have heard them. "Come on, let's go," she said, choosing a direction at random and pulling him in it. Justin chuckled and allowed himself to be led, the two of them ending up in front of the first women's clothing store they came across. It was a local business called Chic Digs, a Fashion Nova knockoff clearly selling cheap, drop-shipped clothes that Justin and Trixie could have purchased online for half the price. Here, she said, dropping his hand as they entered in preparation to grab a few items. And then we'll go. Trixie stepped into the store threshold, giving a small hello in return to the bore of svelte employee's greeting, and looked around, her goal to end the shopping trip as soon as she could. She grabbed a pair of sweatpants from the display, a pair of leggings hanging on another rack, and a sweatshirt, collecting all three in just a few moments and turning back to awaiting Justin. There, she said decisively, holding up the clothes like a trophy. Got 'em. Trixie, I really think you should try those on, Justin suggested, eyeing her lustfully. I mean, I really think you should. I don't know if you know just how big you are, he teased as he gave her belly a pat and sent her vibrating wildly. Justin, Trixie hissed, her face burning. Stop. It's gonna fit. It's not gonna fit, baby, Justin corrected in a lowered voice despite the apathetic salesperson's complete disinterest in their conversation. You got too fat. You need bigger sizes. These are the biggest sizes they have, Trixie protested angrily, and it's gonna fit just fine. Babe, Justin reasoned, the look he gave her speaking volumes. Come on. I know sometimes you get a little embarrassed. I know you're in denial about just how much weight you put on, but you need clothes you can actually wear. I mean, look at yourself, he said, indicating to the bulges of fat protruding from every angle of her skin-tight ensemble, her bloated body only made to look bigger by the way her clothes emphasized her swell. These are gonna fit, Trixie protested again, resting a hand on her lower belly as if her tubby fingers could disguise its size. Okay, Justin relented. Just try them on. Trixie gulped. Try them on? She asked, as if she hadn't heard him perfectly. Yeah, just try them on and I'll buy them for you. Trixie nodded, resolved. The last thing she wanted to do was examine her naked body in an unforgiving dressing room mirror, but she was certain that the clothes she'd picked out would fit her just fine, that Justin's lust had clouded his vision to skew his perception of her true size. It had happened before, like the last time they flew when Justin swore she would need a seatbelt extender when the standard issue had ended up clicking closed with no problem, or the time he'd brought her to a restaurant and told her they should probably do a booth because she wouldn't be able to fit her hips between the arms of the chairs. Both times he'd been wrong. He'd wanted the humiliating facts to be true so badly that he genuinely believed them, and while Trixie mostly let the situation slide without comment, in public she felt she still had honor to defend. She turned heel and made her way slowly to the back of the store for the fitting rooms, turning sideways at times to avoid knocking into things from displays and racks with her undulating body and dangerously wide hips. Justin followed her, eyes undoubtedly locked on her hypnotically wobbling ass, and stopped short when she did. Trixie frowned at the sign in front of her and sighed, deciding she hated every moment of this trip. Can you go get the lady? Trixie asked Justin in a hushed voice. It says she has to open the door. Justin nodded and turned, calling out to the less than helpful employee with a wave as he approached her. Hey, he began. Hey, ma'am, can we get the dressing room key? The girl nodded without looking up from her phone and pushed herself off the counter where she was leaning, reaching beneath it and producing a cluster of keys attached to a thick metal ring. She finally looked up, blinking quickly as if noticing Justin for the first time, and smiled at him, her personability surprising considering her lack of attention to her work. I'd give it to you, but I have to do it, she said, smiling even wider while looking directly into his eyes. It's not that I don't trust you, it's just store policy. Justin nodded. No worries, my girlfriend just needs to try a few things on, he said, emphasizing the key word a bit to counteract the young woman's obvious flirting. The employee frowned and looked in the directions of the fitting room, her eyes widening when she saw Trixie. That's your girlfriend? She blurted. My favorite girl in the world, Justin retorted casually, turning his back to her and heading back to where Trixie was waiting for him. The woman paused for another beat and scrambled after her, the multitude of keys in her hand tinkling. Well, she called after him as he rejoined Trixie. Well, I was just asking, 'cause I can help make recommendations and stuff. I know the product, like, super well, and I just feel like I want to save you the effort, she explained, still addressing Justin. Like, I'm not trying to be mean, I swear I'm not, the sales attendant went on, her eyes dropping to Trixie's gut. But we, like, definitely don't have your size here. Like, no offense, for real, but we, like, only have up to, like, a 16. Like, seriously, there's no way you could fit in a 16. Trixie blinked, stricken, but Justin just laughed. You can go ahead and open the door, he said, with a gesture towards it. That's the thing about my girl. Never has to work a day in her life, but she still gets to buy whatever she wants, for whatever reason she wants it. She doesn't have to take extra shifts and save up when she wants to get something. I just get it for her. And if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, she doesn't have to return it, because she'll never be working a job she hates just to make rent. The girl wrinkled her brow at the obvious slight and opened the door in silence, mumbling a "yeah, sure," in response to Justin's even-toned and petty "thanks, enjoy the rest of your shift." Trixie's face had been bright red since the interaction started, and despite how much she loved Justin for always sticking up for her, she was horrified that she'd gotten so fat that random strangers were now starting to mimic Justin's rhetoric, to tell her that she was too big to do average things. Trixie gave Justin a small smile and slid into the dressing room, glad to have a barrier between herself and the sales attendant's judging gaze. She took herself in the mirror, instantly seeing what the girl saw. She was huge. It was as if every time she looked in a new mirror she got bigger, and Trixie was tired of being shocked at the thickening, overfed reflection staring back at her. Her shirt had ridden up even further as she walked, exposing more of her gut, and she sucked in with effort to try and pull it down, the shirt immediately springing up as she breathed out and her belly surged back forward with a slight jiggle. As hungry as she was, her belly basically empty due to her smaller-than-average breakfast, it was time to face the facts. She'd officially grown too fat to suck in her stomach. Even with all her strength, the rounded mass deflated by less than an inch, and when she released her underused ab muscles, her flabby belly poked back out in front of her, shaking in protest. There wasn't a movement she could make without waves of fat rippling across her body, and her sweatpants were so tight they looked nearly painted on. She struggled and kicked her way out of them, revealing panties already tearing at the seams, and then began the process of working her way out of her painfully tight shirt, the hem caught in her upper rolls, and the sleeves so tight that they refused to budge, comfortably buried in her fat. She yanked at the shirt aggressively, unable to control her wobble as she did, and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, realizing that she'd swollen herself up so much that she needed to take a step back to analyze the fullness of the damage she'd done. She was too big for the mirror. Trixie grunted, trying her hardest with the stuck t-shirt as her tits bounced wildly, and Justin rapped on the door gently. "Trixie," he called. "You okay, babe? Let me see the outfit." "One sec," Trixie called back as a light sweat broke out on her forehead, almost free from the t-shirt. She finally yanked it off and tossed it on a hook with her sweatpants, reaching for the replacement pair she'd grabbed from the Bright Peak shelf. She unfolded them and held them up in front of her, her heart sinking as she realized that Justin and the jealous saleslady were right. She would never be able to squeeze into those pants. They were smaller than the pants she'd left the house in, and as she assessed them, she realized she might not even be able to tug them over her flabby calves, much less up her thighs. She was standing in the mirror with nowhere in the small room to hide, tuckered from the simple task of kicking off her clothes and watching herself closely. Trixie never thought she'd get this fat. Never thought she'd let Justin have his way with her and turn her into a bloated, food-obsessed fatty who couldn't control herself, who couldn't fit into the biggest sizes at the mall. She couldn't even squeeze herself into a bra, and as impressive as her enormous tits were, they served as just another reminder of how far she'd let herself go. She pressed a hand into her gut, feeling it sink deeper and deeper into her softness. She was usually so constantly stuffed that she never had the opportunity to experience her body like this, to sit back and really feel how much she'd grown when her belly was empty. Most of the time she could argue that her waddling, her struggles to get around, her difficulty in fitting into her clothes, all of it could be attributed to how full she was, how bloated she'd become while stuffing herself during her last meal. It was rare that she'd have to look herself in the face and admit that it wasn't the bloating. It was her. Just her. She'd grown so fat, let Justin make her so fat, that what was once the size of her belly bloated to its max capacity was now the size of her belly when she was so hungry her stomach was beginning to hurt. It growled again, loudly, and Trixie bit her lip, conflicted. She didn't want to admit that there was no way she'd be able to squash her flab into those tiny clothes, but she also knew just how much effort it would be to try, that she would be huffing and panting from the effort that would likely result in her ripping the garments anyway. She was so hungry, and expending so much effort just to prove Justin right would only make her hungrier. She gave her belly a firm pat, wincing at the slight smacking noise with the knowledge that Justin would know exactly what she was doing, and watched it jiggle. If Justin had come in, he'd probably try to fuck me right here in this room, she thought, beginning to rub and grab at her swollen way that he did, working herself up. If he could even manage to bend me over in this tiny room, she thought, closing her eyes as she pictured Justin behind her in a closet-sized fitting room, grabbing her plush hips and pulling her into him so he could get even deeper, moaning about how hot it was that the two of them barely fit in the room together, about how he wouldn't last long with the way that she jiggled. Babe? Justin asked again, and Trixie's eyes flew open, her longtime boyfriend's voice bringing her back to the present. He was craving Justin and food, and she wasn't sure which one she needed more badly. I'm okay, she called back, no longer bothering to lower her voice. You were right. Nothing fits. Not even clothes, she added, knowing just how much it was driving him crazy to hear her publicly acknowledge her gain. In fact, she went on, her tone dripping with desire, I don't even think I can get back into the clothes I came in. They were just so tight. Justin was silent, and Trixie knew it was only in an effort to contain himself. I'm gonna try to put these sweatpants on without ripping them, Trixie went on. But I'm so hungry, she whined, dragging out the word. She heard Justin sharp intake of breath, knowing what her little public performance was doing to him. I'm so hungry, she repeated. I just want to stuff my face. I could literally eat a whole cow right now. I guess that's how I got so fat. Jesus, Trixie, she heard Justin mutter from just outside the door, the tension in his voice nearly palpable. I can't believe I got this fat, she continued, ignoring him. I mean, I used to be so skinny. I used to wear a size 6, and now I can barely fit in this dressing room, much less fit into any of these clothes. I can't believe I'm this huge, she said, knowing it was Justin's favorite word to describe her. I'm just huge. I'm humongous. How did I get this big so fast? Oh my God, I'm just so huge. She knew Justin was struggling to contain himself outside the door and giggled, picturing his face as he tried to keep himself calm. I'll be right out, babe, she called casually if she hadn't been mercilessly teasing him with descriptions of her girth for the past minute. I just have to get these clothes on. Everything takes me so much longer since getting so huge. After that, can we go to the food court? Justin didn't respond, and Trixie grinned evilly, knowing he was unable to. Justin, she called again innocently, please, can you go to the food court? I know we just had breakfast, but I'm starving. I just need 1 or 2 combo meals as a little snack before we keep shopping. Justin cleared his throat once, then again. Sure, babe, he finally responded in an unsteady voice that betrayed his barely concealed emotions. Sure, whatever you want. Thanks, baby, Trixie responded brightly, preparing to go for the kill. You know, you feed me so much. It's really your fault I got so fat. She heard Justin sigh heavily and smiled with satisfaction, knowing that soon he'd be taking her home and stuffing her in more ways than one. Chapter 4. Trixie? A terrifyingly familiar voice called. Trixie, is that you? Trixie's heart sank, and she gripped the bar of the shopping cart in front of her more tightly, wishing she could sink into the ground and disappear. Trixie, it is you! Oh my God! Trixie turned slowly, wanting nothing more than to waddle away as quickly as her plump little legs would let her, but instead she pasted on a forced smile. Kathy, she greeted in a near warble, trying as hard as she could to conceal the dejection she knew was in her tone. She sighed as quietly as she could, taking in the source of the offending voice. It was Kathy, Trixie's long-time high school frenemy turned casual, but still rivalrous, acquaintance. They'd competed for everything in high school, whether it was boys, grades, or a starting spot on the soccer team, measured their accomplishments against each other, and shoved what they were able to achieve in the other's face, all under the guise of true friendship. They knew each other well, or at least as well as one is required to know their enemy to defeat them in battle, and their years of feigned closelessness often boiled over in contentious arguments, the true source of the vitriol obvious to both but remaining unspoken. They didn't like each other, and they wanted to one-up the other. Kathy looked exactly the same as she had the last time Trixie had seen her, at a house party of a mutual friend the summer she had come home from her sophomore year of college. Since then, Trixie had only laid eyes on the thin blonde through social media, and after meeting Justin 2 years ago and letting him fatten her up like a prized pig, she'd abandoned even that, the images of her still thin peers serving as a constant reminder of just how far she'd let herself go. They'd always competed over looks, over who wore the smaller size or had the flatter stomach, and as the two women stood facing each other, it couldn't be more clear that the competition had ended with an obvious winner. Kathy, dressed as if she was just coming from the gym, just going to the gym, or at least looking to give off that impression, wore a pair of mint low-rise leggings and a cream-cropped half-zip athletic jacket, a hint of her toned abs visible and the waistline of the leggings riding low on her hips. Her blonde hair, its highlights a little darker than Trixie remembered, was pulled into a high ponytail that showed off the sharp cheekbones that structured her face. She'd never been beautiful, at least, never in Trixie's very biased opinion, but her body looked better than ever, and Kathy clearly knew it. Her lithe arms and legs were made to seem ever thinner by their length, and her proportions were graceful, the flattering outfit reminiscent of an off-duty ballerina. She was snatched, enviably so, and Trixie was very much the opposite. She knew that Kathy, who had first seen her from behind, was making the same lightning-quick judgments and assessments that Trixie had, and she cringed internally as she saw herself through Kathy's eyes. Every time Trixie took in her own body, she was comparing herself to how she'd looked yesterday, or the week before, or the month before. Even though each time Trixie made those comparisons she knew she was getting bigger and bigger, it was one thing to compare herself to the way she was 40 pounds ago, when she was already solidly within the category of fat, and another thing to compare herself to the last time Kathy had seen her, when she was still a fit, athletic, enviable young woman who didn't jiggle with the slightest movement or struggle to get off the couch. Now she was seeing the difference in the way Kathy saw it, and it was shocking to say the least. Trixie had never been razor thin, had never had a six-pack to flaunt, but she had always had an enviable body type. A flat stomach, a small waist, hips that weren't necessarily large but were shapely and flared out from her torso in a curvaceous manner that Trixie, and the boys that courted her, had always appreciated. She had it all. Throughout high school and college she'd played sports, gone for constant runs, and taken regular yoga and Pilates classes, her strength and stamina higher than average compared to most women she knew. All of that had been undone by Justin in a matter of months, and his dominant, forceful attitude, his seductive, coercive looks and touches, and his absolutely feral lust for her growth transformed her overnight. Her flat stomach was replaced with a hefty, jiggling ball of fat that was hanging more and more of late, the always wobbling flesh of her lower belly forever working itself free of her too tight shirts. She'd porked herself up so much that the top of her gut, once only prominent and protruding when she stuffed herself to the point of immobility, had taken on a permanent swell, meaning she could rest her hand on the top of it even when her stomach was completely empty, a recent, and frankly concerning, development. She'd grown wider and wider as she swelled outwards, and she dwarfed her old frame, her once shapely hips now straining the sides of her pants as fatty saddlebags instead. Her ass was a titanic, unmanageable mountain of plush fat, and whenever she waddled, the effort of forcing her chunky thighs past each other left her enormous behind quaking near inappropriately, her mass so sensitive to movement that the distracting jiggle almost seemed purposeful. Every part of her body was becoming so soft, so swollen, and it was only when she saw herself through the eyes of someone like Kathy that she was able to fully admit what she'd let Justin do to her. Her upper arms looked like fleshy, succulent hams, and she noted with horror that her pudgy wrists were almost as thick around as Kathy's slim biceps. Her calves were thicker than Kathy's thighs. Kathy's thin fingers made Trixie's look like overstuffed sausages about to burst out of their casing. In fact, Kathy's entire outfit, as fitted as it was, still made Trixie seem as if she was going to burst out of her own. Trixie was also adorned with leggings, but her choice of garment was motivated by the fact that nothing else comfortably fit her, or at least, nothing that didn't carry the threat of ripping open in public like her sweatpants so often did. Her leggings were stretched so thin that they were nearly translucent, and every dimple of cellulite on her wobbling thighs was perfectly visible, a ripple rolling across them as she walked. Her gut, which she tried valiantly to suck in and tuck within her leggings before leaving the house that day, was obscuring the leggings' waistline, jiggling freely whenever it got the opportunity. Trixie still hadn't purchased better-fitting clothes beyond the new 3XL leggings and sweatpants Justin had ordered for her after their less-than-successful mall trip, and while she'd originally been able to don the new legwear comfortably for the first few weeks, it had grown rather tight of late, and she was running into the same problems she had before. She didn't even realize that getting fat enough to actually blow out the seams of a clothing item was possible until about a year ago. And now it was happening so often and so quickly that just hearing her seams creak and groan in protest whenever Trixie heaved herself off the couch was enough to leave Justin with something to take care of. She was growing faster now, and it was getting very obvious to both of them. Her appetite was just as insatiable as it had always been, but as she grew, so did her capacity. She was never satisfied, never went a moment without feeling the swell of an overfed gut putting pressure on her already heavy middle. The light breakfast she'd had before their little shopping trip had been the last normal meal she'd eaten in weeks, and Justin was beginning to up the ante every time, to push her to her absolute limits and beyond just to hear her burp and moan. She'd always been the reluctant one, the one that incoherently begged Justin to slow down through an overstuffed mouth as he crammed more and more greasy junk food down her throat, Trixie completely helpless as her belly pinned her to the couch. She'd always been the one that was hesitant, the one that woke up in the light of day with a bellyache and regrets, knowing that Justin was going to make her do it all again the next day. But that dynamic was beginning to shift. Justin was still the driving force behind her feedings, still took things too far every time just because of how badly he wanted her, but Trixie was becoming part of the problem. She was so constantly hungry, her cravings so constantly growing in size and decreasing in nutritional value, that now she readily opened up for whatever it was that Justin wanted to feed her. She didn't want to get any bigger, or at least it wasn't her express goal, but she put away more than a pound of fat's worth of calories at every meal now, regardless of whether Justin was there or not. 3,500 calories was so much easier to reach than she thought. She remembered once, early on in her gain, how Justin had been hard as a rock the first time she finished 3,500 calories in one sitting. How he pulled off her clothes while grunting in her ear about how he'd just made her gain a pound, right then, right there. How she was getting fatter in front of his very eyes. Now, that amount of gluttony was so commonplace that Trixie didn't think less than that amount could satisfy her. 3,500 calories had gone from the sustenance of multiple days to a single meal, and Trixie could hardly be sure how it had even all happened. 2 breakfast baconators, 2 large fries, 2 hash browns, a large vanilla caramelized coffee, and a large Coke from Wendy's, a very typical breakfast order for Trixie nowadays, clocked in at a whopping 3,918 calories, and Trixie was terrified to make the recent discovery that she still felt a twinge of hunger afterwards. Hunger, of course, was a very strong word to describe the sensation, and a more apt analysis would be to acknowledge that Trixie had conflated stuffing herself to the absolute brim with being full. If her stomach wasn't aching from the amount she'd managed to put away, she was still hungry, and that mentality was taking her gain to new realms. Justin had pointed out the other day, already rubbing and squeezing her body as he spoke, that she'd started breathing heavily just from the speed and intensity with which she ate. "You're so out of shape," he murmured, peppering her expansive gut with gentle smacks to watch her belly undulate. "God, you're such a pig, Trixie. You're getting so fucking big. You're panting while you stuff your face. You're so fat that getting fatter is actually a workout for you." She'd had no response, just allowed him to continue fondling her rolls while she tucked away a box of pastries until he couldn't take it anymore and helped her waddle to the bedroom, but his little observation had struck a major chord. In the back of her mind, Trixie had always partially believed that everything she and Justin had done was impermanent, reversible with the right amount of effort. Sure, she'd put on a few, but people lost weight all the time. It was in every magazine and commercial. She'd never considered the possibility that Justin would push her so far into the realms of obesity that there was nothing she could do about it. But here she was, so fat that she got out of breath while eating. How could she start working out again? How could she even go for a little walk if she was gasping with effort when she tried to get on top? Her fat had rendered her a de facto pillow princess while Justin took care of her and used her immense body for his pleasure, an ideal situation for both of them. Regardless, if waddling across a parking lot or getting out of a chair got her exhausted, how could she ever run on a treadmill again? Justin had ruined her, permanently ruined her, and the realization was only just beginning to set in. She was a big girl now, and she always would be. She'd always waddle around with her shame and Justin's sick sexual fantasies wobbling all over her body. It wasn't until moments like this that Trixie realized just how far this whole thing had gone, how insane she was for opening her mouth for every greasy, sugary, fatty treat Justin shoved into her. Was pleasing that gorgeous, lust-inspiring man she loved worth all this? Was it worth moments when she wanted to hide but knew she was too enormous to do so? She had no option but to face her former rival. She was too fat to even run away. Kathy's structured, angular face just emphasized the chubby little double chin Trixie's bloated face sported, emphasized the way her fat was beginning to encroach upon her neck. Kathy's snug-fitting zip clinging to her lightly muscular body emphasized the way Trixie's too-tight shirt was being swallowed up by her massive tits, the exposed cleavage less a bid for attention and more a desperation to pull the overtucked tank top down far enough to cover her ever-growing shape. Kathy, looking exactly as she always had, emphasized just how much Trixie had changed. Justin teased her about it sometimes, bringing up friends from their shared past, fantasizing about what they would say if they could see Trixie gorging herself on the couch with her face smeared with melted chocolate and whipped cream. He would tell her just how shocked they'd be, how disgusted, how they wouldn't even believe it was her, wouldn't be able to recognize her. She only wished that had been the case, wished Kathy had seen her as just another average American waddling through the grocery store with a cart full of excess calories and hadn't taken a closer look. Even the effort of turning to face Kathy left her wobbling, and her face reddened as they both silently acknowledged what a whale Trixie had porked herself into. "Kathy," Trixie forced out again. "Hey." "Trixie," Kathy cried with excitement. "Trixie, oh my God, girl, I haven't seen you in ages." Trixie forced a smile, and suddenly Kathy's arms were around her, or around as much of Trixie's mass as the thin girl could actually embrace. Trixie winced as she felt her body jiggle wildly from the abrupt touch, and Kathy's arms sunk so far into the plush, exposed fat all over Trixie's body that Trixie wanted to push her away, to jump back in an effort to conceal the all-too-obvious weight she'd piled on. "This is so crazy," Kathy was saying, pulling back with her hand still on Trixie's rounded shoulders. "Another one bites the dust, I guess. Oh my God, this is making me feel so old." Trixie wrinkled her brow, confusion beginning to set in until Kathy did the unthinkable. Resting a hand on Trixie's bloated, swollen belly, Kathy asked, "What do? You look like you're about to pop." Trixie's face fell, and she did all she could to keep her expression neutral, to conceal the scream of horror she felt building within her. Kathy thought she was pregnant. She had gotten so fat in such a short amount of time that the people who once knew her didn't believe that it was naturally possible, didn't believe that her enormity could be caused by gluttony alone. It didn't even cross Kathy's mind that Trixie had just gotten fat. Instead, she'd leapt straight to the assumption that, frankly, made much more sense. Justin had teased her in similar ways before, told her that when she bloated herself up to maximum capacity she was starting to look pregnant, but she didn't think anyone else would ever notice that anyone else would ever think, much less automatically assume, that she had porked up because she'd gotten herself knocked up. Trixie's mind raced for a way out of the situation, any excuse or distraction that would mean she didn't have to reveal to Kathy that she wasn't pregnant at all, but the source of the roundness of her middle was the contents of her shopping cart and not a baby. How could she possibly say that to the woman who was already giddy at the thought of pregnancy making Trixie blow up? Once Trixie told her that there was no baby, Kathy's face would morph to pity that barely concealed glee. In a long-standing petty high school competition, your opponent getting unrecognizably fat was the ultimate win, and Trixie hated to lose. More than that, she would be so embarrassed, mortified to watch Kathy take her in with the new knowledge that she'd done this to herself, that it wasn't outside circumstances or a medical situation, but that Trixie had actually eaten herself into the blubbery slob bursting out of her clothes that Kathy saw before her. Trixie stuttered, distracted by the way Kathy's hands rubbing her belly reminded her of Justin. Well, I, Her hand fell to her belly as well, pushing one tubby hand into the flap. And Trixie took a deep breath, making a split-second decision she was already positive she was going to regret. "Soon," she finally answered dishonestly, her face growing even redder, the lie. Really soon." "God, I'll bet," said Kathy, her hands still exploring the expanse of Trixie's gut. "I mean, you were such a tiny little thing back in high school. Is it twins?" Trixie just nodded, her shame and her need to lead the conversation mounting with every passing second. "Twins?" Kathy all but shrieked. "Really? Trixie, that is so exciting. You're gonna have your hands full." Trixie nodded, feeling faint. "Are you still with Justin?" Kathy asked. "I didn't see you post anything about this on Insta. I'm like, so shocked." Yeah, with Justin, Trixie confirmed witlessly. I know he's excited for you to have those kids and get your body back. Don't worry, Ma. Chasing around after two kids, you'll drop the baby weight in no time. Trixie nodded again, doing all she could to keep the smile plastered on her face. You know, Kathy went on, one of my friends said breastfeeding is the best way to go for baby and mom. Just melts the weight right off. And I also saw this article last week about how eating more protein is the best way to keep your weight under control when you're pregnant. I could find it and send it to you. Trixie nodded again, dejectedly taking note of the spring lettuce snakes, baby carrots, and frozen veggies in Kathy's handbasket compared to the family-sized bag of chips, the bucket-sized gallons of ice cream, the liters of soda, and the frozen junk food in her own cart. I cannot believe I ran into you. I almost didn't recognize you, Kathy said, swooping in for another hug before Trixie could react and squeezing her soft, wobbling rolls because her hands couldn't meet at Trixie's back. You look beautiful, Mama. You're absolutely glowing. Kathy's face took on a more somber disposition, and Trixie braced herself for the worst. I know in high school we could be so stupid and vain about the silliest things, Kathy said in a quieter voice, leaning in towards Trixie. Competing over boys and soccer and other stupid shit. I know we were young, but I'm really not proud of it, of some of the things I said to you. It honestly, sometimes it honestly keeps me up at night, certain things I said. I was kind of a bully, not just to you. Like that time I called you Thunder Thighs? Kathy giggled abashedly. It still haunts me, literally does, but to know you're doing so well and thriving, to know that you're happy and starting a family, it really makes me so glad. She fixed Trixie with a sincere smile. And listen, I know we haven't seen each other in a while and bodies change and all, but you should have seen me after I graduated. I got an office job where I was just sitting around all day and I gained like 20 pounds. I was huge. I was so embarrassed. I didn't want to post on social media at all because I thought everyone would judge me and stuff. And I don't know if that's why I haven't seen you lately, but you have nothing to be embarrassed about at all. It's not like you just got out of control guzzling donuts like me. You're literally bringing life into this world. You should be proud. You're eating for three. Trixie nodded again, her heart pounding faster and faster. She realized what a deep hole she dug herself into. Oh, do you have a registry? Kathy asked eagerly. I'd love to get you something. Um, Trixie started, her face growing even redder. Um, we're not really doing that, any of that stuff. Okay, good. So I don't have to ask why I wasn't invited to the baby shower, Kathy joked. Well, if you need anything, even just want to vent or something, call me. I'll let you finish your shopping, she said, peeking into Trixie's cart. Trixie nodded, her forced smile faltering at the edges, and turned back towards her shopping cart. Oh, and I'll send you that article, Kathy called as Trixie waddled away as quickly as she could, her whole body jiggling from her faster-than-average gait. And she actually thought you were pregnant, asked Justin for the third time later that night, sitting next to a naked and stuffed Trixie lying beached on the bed while he rubbed her freshly stumped gut. Yes, Trixie breathlessly confirmed again, still panting from Justin's most recent feeding. She wasn't just being shitty, she actually thought it was twins. Trixie burped loudly and nodded, almost too full to speak. God damn, Trixie, what have you done to yourself? He asked with a firm smack of the overfed mound in front of him. Trixie groaned louder from the pressure and Justin laughed, moving around her so he could get a better grip of her ball of a belly with both hands and give it a few heavy, wobbling shakes. Her gut was so stuffed that it moved all as one, even her side rolls bouncing up and down as Justin made his fattened-up piggy wobble. A cacophony of burps and groans burst from Trixie's plump lips as Justin bounced her gut up and down faster and faster, and she began to moan as well, the sensation as humiliating as it was pleasurable. What would she say if she knew that all of this was you? All of this was from you stuffing yourself until you couldn't take it anymore and swelling up like a chubby little balloon just 'cause I asked you to. What would she say? Trixie, eyes closed, continued moaning, the feeling of Justin's hands on her belly and his seductive voice in her ear all she could focus on. God, Trixie, you're so fucking big, he breathed. You're so huge. If everyone already thinks you're pregnant now, imagine how shocked they're gonna be when I actually stuck a baby into you. Trixie's breath quickened, her desperation for him reaching its peak, but her gut too scuffed to do anything about it for herself. Come here, baby, he said, pulling his shirt over his head with one hand as he spoke. Come here. I don't want my little piggy to be a liar.